All right, guys, my second guest tonight is Matthew Ho. He is a candidate for U.S. Senate through the Green Party representing the state of North Carolina. Matthew, thank you so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you and talk to the folks who are, listening and watching.
So I've been bringing on independent and third party candidates, I would say like for the past couple of months, people who are looking to work in the political system outside of the duopoly.
Right.
And I found your story particularly interesting. Number one, I went to high school in North Carolina, so I kind of identify with that. But also, I know that you were once in the military, but you're also anti-war, and I identify with that as well. Like, I wasn't in the military personally, but my parents were, and that's actually why I'm anti-war, because I've seen what happens. But I have to ask you, why did you decide to run as a third-party candidate?
Well, I've never been a Democrat. I've never registered with them, never been a part of the party, given money to candidates, but I've worked with a lot of Democrats in Congress. The last 12 years of my life, I've been with a think tank in Washington, D.C. So I've done a lot of my anti-war, foreign policy, human rights work in Congress, and worked with both Republicans and Democrats. And, the idea that there's not much difference, that there is a difference in degrees on certain issues, and they have certainly their identity politics differences, right? Their culture wars differences that they like to talk about, I guess. But, in terms of when it comes down to the actual status quo, it's deadly for, tens of millions of Americans. There's not much difference. I was asked to run by the Green Party. I registered with the Green Party a year before, first political party I ever joined, because I believe that we have to create the change that we want. The idea that somehow it's just organically going to grow, that there's going to be a new political system, new political parties, that we're going to, the machine that's in place is just going to, on its own, bend to our will. We all know that's not the case. So this is part of that for me, is helping to build something new, helping to build the change that we need, provide accountability for what are crimes that have befallen tens of millions of people, both in the U.S. and overseas, as well as justice for what's occurring, and relief, both the urgent need for relief now, across the board economically in this country, or for healthcare, but also too for what's coming in the decades with the climate collapse.
Agreed. Where do you feel people stand politically in North Carolina today? When I went to high school in North Carolina, it was more so a red state. I was surprised when it went blue for Obama. To be honest, I was really surprised. But in reference to like people running as like independent or third parties, where do you feel people stand politically in North Carolina now?
Well, unaffiliated voters, independent voters are the biggest block in North Carolina now. They just overtook the Democratic Party, actually. The disaffection, the dismay, the disappointment with both parties is very clear here in North Carolina. We had to get on the ballot. We had to get the North Carolina Green Party on the ballot, and the North Carolina Green Party, their members, their officers, along with folks on my campaign, just so proud of the job they did. We collected 22,000 signatures across the state, collected signatures 96 out of 100 North Carolina counties, and submitted those to be on the ballot. And we're still waiting for the state to do some procedural things, and then we should be on the ballot as a recognized political party. And then my campaign will be able to, represent the Green Party for the U.S. Senate. And the response that we got, Sabrina, because people ask me like, well, you were out there, because what we were able to do is we were able to take that 2.5 month long period of collecting signatures and also do canvassing, because we primarily used our own people. So the folks out there getting the signatures for us were the Green Party members. They were socialists, leftists, independents. So we weren't using petitioning firms. Petitioning firms accounted for about 5% of the 22,000 signatures we collected. So our folks were the ones out there. And so the feedback we got, of course, a lot of things on housing costs, rental costs, price of gas, those conversations would come up. War on drugs was a very big issue. But primarily over and over again, what we heard was the need for change. It has just so happened that in the last 2 weeks of our petitioning effort, it overlapped with the 2 weeks of early primary voting here in North Carolina. So literally, people would be taking part in partisan primaries. They would come out literally 2 or 3 minutes after they filled out a Democrat or Republican primary ballot. And we would meet them in the parking lot of the polling place, and they would sign our petition to get the Green Party on the ballot. Literally 2 or 3 minutes before they had been casting ballots for a Democrat or Republican. When I was out there a number of times at primary locations, and I would say, and if we get on the ballot, I'm going to run for U.S. Senate. I talked to those folks. And again, 2 or 3 minutes before, they had just checked off a name for a Republican or a Democrat for U.S. Senate. And now they're saying to me, I'm going to vote for you in November. That was what we saw over and over again, this desire for something different, the realization that the status quo is deadly, that only thing that's going to change it is us changing it. And by no means do I just, say it's all about electoralism. I believe that a political party is just one part of a larger movement. It's just one arm of a larger body. The political party needs to be an effort of a mass movement. And, that's what we're looking here to build, helping to build. Don't want to step on the toes of folks, minor parties who've done a lot before. But I think the moment is now. We're seeing across the country the urgency for that movement and to have a political aspect to it.
I'm glad that you mentioned that more people are becoming independents, because this is something I think that we don't hear often on mainstream media, is that the majority of Americans want a third party.
Right.
They want, or an independent candidate. They want something different. And those are not the talking points that you would hear on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. They really want to keep you in the duopoly. I'm curious in reference to healthcare in North Carolina. How do people feel about Medicare for all or universal healthcare or single payer being an option?
Like everywhere else, there's majority public opinion support for a universal health care, single payer, Medicare for all, whatever the terminology you want to use. I will be the only candidate for U.S. Senate in the race that is offering that is advocating for that. It's saying that this is a need. The Green Party believes that housing, healthcare, education, and jobs are human rights. The Democrats, there are 15 Democrats running for federal seats in North Carolina. Only one, 14 House seats and 1 Senate. Only one Democrat out of 15 running for federal office supports universal health care, Medicare for all, whatever you want to call it. 1 out of 15. There's a Democrat who just voted for the Don't Say Gay bill here in North Carolina, running for U.S. Congress. The Democrat who is also has voted to fund Planned Parenthood a number of times, who's also running for Congress. I mean, so the representation of the Democrats in terms of who they're running, it doesn't display who they say they are representing. And of course, the Republican and Libertarians are not advocating for any improvement in our healthcare system. We have a system here in North Carolina. Just give you an idea. We have 1,200 infant deaths a year in North Carolina. So that's 3 or 4 times a day. A mom and a dad leaves a hospital and their infant has just died. And from that, you can extrapolate everything else. The average health insurance premium per person in North Carolina is about $500. If you make, my friend who lives with me, and a lot of why I'm doing this is because of the people in my life, what I see. The number of people I know who have to check their checking account to see if they can go to the doctor. Right. It's people I love, and they have to make dangerous choices based upon looking at what's in their checking account, whether they can afford to go to the doctor to get their prescriptions. Even if you look at it in this way, the most basic most basic plans here for healthcare in North Carolina are going to cost you, with the deductible, about 11 grand a year, right? I mean, it's about $250 a month you can get a plan for, and it's about an 8 grand deductible. I know that because one of my very best friends who makes $20 an hour, that's how she lives. So she works a full work week. She doesn't work a full work week because her boss won't give her 40 hours. Right? We all know that. So she doesn't make that $36,000 a year you would make if you worked 40 hours a week, right? So can you imagine that though? So say you do get that 36 grand. And I shouldn't say imagine it, because I know she's right here, I mean, make that 36 grand, 11 grand can go to healthcare.
Right.
How is that? I mean, right. And so it's just like, and that's just one example of how, the majority of people who are working class and middle class are living their lives. We know this. We know that 45% of adults, working age adults in the United States, are underinsured or uninsured. 45% of us.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, so the reality of that, people see that, and then they see that no one is offering anything other than, these ideas that we're going to allow. What's the phrase they like, Sabrina? Access. We want access, right? So, but it's terrible. We see it. The need for change that people are telling us is because they are feeling it. And so we think we have a very good opportunity here in North Carolina to build something on that politically, also to put pressure on the system for it to change, because, it's hey, I mean, we could say it over and over again. We can all do our best Frederick Douglass, impersonations and say, power concedes nothing without demand. But unless we actually do that, unless we actually force them to do it, that quote's as good as, access to healthcare is, right?
Exactly. I used to do this thing on Facebook before I started my show. I used to complain about the healthcare system a lot on Facebook. And it got to the point where friends of mine from high school, like back in the day, they started sending me screenshots of their medical bills.
Yeah.
And that's when I really woke up. And I'd worked for the healthcare system before, but this time it was different seeing those images, because these were people I knew personally that were affected. And I was getting screenshots of bills of people that had a significant other going through chemotherapy, had health insurance, and they still had $1,600 bills every time they got chemo. So it was really frustrating to me. And I should probably do that again at some point and really use that to put some kind of pressure. I think we could use that to put pressure on politicians. Look, this is what people are paying, even people that have insurance. The insurance companies aren't paying as much as they should, unless you have TRICARE, right? When my parents were in the military, TRICARE was great. For the most part, they paid for everything, right?
Yeah.
Why can't we have for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, hey, socialism for the military, right, and rugged individualism for the rest of us. I mean, I get my healthcare through the Veterans Administration. It certainly could be better resourced, the VA, and there's a danger that the VA will be privatized because it is the second biggest budget in the federal budget. So it's a cash cow, but it is a system that works, that provides services. I don't have to think about how much money I have to go see the doctor. The doctors, the staff, the nurses, the administrators don't have to look at some type of ledger or talk to some accountant or some administrator to get approval to get me what I need. I mean, that is the model for me, and I see it in my life, and then I see it how people I love are. They're damaged by this. And this goes across the board, not just physical health, but, you see it with dental health. You see it with mental health. I mean, the number of people I know who need to get in to see somebody who can't, and this all ties together, right? This is all part of our larger economic Bill of Rights, which itself is a part of our larger Green New Deal. It's as well, it ties into the war on drugs. This idea that we've treated for 5 decades now, we have treated people with substance abuse and addiction issues as criminals rather than dealing with them as patients, as a matter of public health. So I mean, all these things tie in together, and people are feeling that because it's just not the healthcare that people are feeling. It's the fact that their rent just went up 20%. I mean, I have people in my neighborhood who've had to move because a corporation came in, purchased their home, and now push their rent up to the point that they can't pay. So now they have to move even farther from where they work. They're already living pretty far away from where they work. And they're not getting a break or a cut, right? I mean, so now everything gets worse. And the idea that people they understand that this is all deliberate policy. This phenomenon, I'm not sure how it is up in Massachusetts. You're up in Massachusetts, right, Sabrina? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How we have this phenomenon now, and we're seeing in other parts of the country where corporations are coming in and purchasing entry-level homes. The homes, right? And then they're turning around and renting them for, pushing the rental price up, and they're pushing housing prices. Oh, of course. And that phenomenon begins 12 years ago when the Obama administration decides not to help the 11 million families that lost their homes, but to bail out the banks, because those banks then take that bailout money, turn around and buy all those foreclosed homes. And that's the genesis of this corporate takeover of homes, not even housing, because housing needs to be homes first. I think that's the basis of our understanding of housing as a human right. So people are feeling this across, and this is why we're seeing this desire for something other than, the current, the two-party system, the duopoly.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a huge problem with it here in Massachusetts as well. There's been a lot of gentrification. People have been pushed further and further out. And I've said this, a couple years ago, and I'll continue to say it. Eventually, it's going to get to the point, if someone doesn't stop this or curb this, and our new mayor is no better, she's adding to gentrification in the city, and she ran as a progressive. So I think that if someone doesn't stop this issue, stop all of these investors like BlackRock buying up these properties and selling them, renting them out for more prices or for higher prices, eventually it's going to get to the point where Boston is only going to be a city for professionals, and all of the working class people are going to be pushed out. And there already have been working class people that have been pushed out. But over the last 10 years that I've been here, I've seen it get significantly worse. Why are they charging $3,000 a month for an apartment in the neighborhood of Dorchester, which 10 years ago, you would not see an apartment priced that high in Dorchester? So it's ridiculous how it's going on. And I want people to understand this is happening all across the United States.
It is, and it's deliberate. This is the result of government policy. This is the result of 50 plus years. Like, I was born in 73, so as long as I've been alive, since the Nixon administration. I mean, you can go back and we can talk about Nixon pulling us off the gold standard in 71. I mean, all these things tie together. These are all financialization policies that have just, the whole purpose is to squeeze every dollar and cent to the top. And they've done that by, changing tax codes, regulations, crushing unions. The idea of making sure that workers' wages go down, which they have. 45 years of declining workers' wages. We're seeing it. And now it's even worse because we've got 8% inflation, and, that type of decline in wages. Well, what are workers going to do? Well, they will take our credit. So more money goes to the top. And now we've got the most, folks in the U.S. are in greater debt than at any time in history. The inequality of all this has been deliberate, and people get that. When you talk to people about it, they get it. And the thing is, we have to give them an option, because they see that it's been both the Democrats and the Republicans. Would there have been any difference in John McCain or Mitt Romney's, finance, their interactions with Wall Street, their budgets, what they would have done for American workers and their families? Then Barack? Absolutely not. No, so this understanding is there, and people see it. Like, I lived in Boston for a while. I used to live in Oak Square, and not too long ago, I looked up how much it was to. No, are you kidding me? Oak Square costs that much? It is, and people can say that, like you said, across the entire nation. People are saying that and feeling that, and the where does it go? And the urgency of it now is somehow diminished by what is coming. I mean, the climate collapse that is coming will, if we do not put a societal infrastructure in place that will allow us to get through that collapse. Because just to give people an example, what is going to happen 30 years from now when 25, 30 towns on North Carolina's coast become uninhabitable? Where are those tens and tens of thousands of people going to go? What's going to happen to jobs? What's going to happen? I mean, on and on and on. How are people going to have the resources they need to survive? You think that the what we're seeing now, it's finally being spoken about in greater detail, the effect that the climate change has had on our food prices, on our food supply. But I mean, even in the fall, you had to search to find it. But even in the fall, places like Bloomberg were talking a bit about this, about how that, our increase in food prices, well, that's got to do with the wildfires, the droughts, the floods, and that's okay. How are we going to get through this? If we don't have the societal structure, the infrastructure in place, how are we going to survive? And I mean, that's an amazing thing to say, that urgency diminishes the urgency of now, because certainly what we're dealing with right now is a life and death urgency for tens of millions of American families. Look, we just had it should have been the top story across the nation today, but study came out from the Academy of Sciences that 330,000 people out of the 1 million plus people who died from COVID, their deaths were preventable if we would have had a universal healthcare system, right?
Yeah.
That has been covered nowhere except for like common dreams and democracy now. That's it, but that should be what everybody is speaking about, because the injustice of the system that we have, that has been, because of deliberate government policies, is killing and ruining millions and ruining tens of millions of families.
Agreed. I want to show your website here. So this is Matthew Ho on the issues. And it says, "In political corruption and build democracy for all. Let's build a truly democratic government for the people. Get money out of politics." So that's a really big one for me. Says all of it. "We should have a public financing system with a limited campaign window." Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, Sabrina, I'm a first-time political candidate. I've seen how money impacts politicians. I've been fortunate to get to know members of Congress and spend days with them, and see how their entire day is built around getting money. Even for members of Congress who are in well-protected, gerrymandered districts, they're not going anywhere. They still spend their whole day around getting money. I know how money corrupts things. And coming into this, I thought I understood it that well. And even being a minor party candidate, talking about tens of thousands of dollars, not the hundreds of millions of dollars. Look, the 2020 U.S. Senate race in North Carolina was $300 million. So what's it going to be this year? 325, 350, 400 million. And if anyone thinks that somehow that money doesn't control it all and make the decisions about what will happen when those people are in office, I don't know what to tell you. But even seeing that, though, this idea of how important money is, how it dominates everything, you can't do anything without it. And it precludes, we just went through this petitioning process, collecting, again, 22,000 signatures. We paid our people, our folks, we paid them $20 an hour, raised the money to do that. And we were able to do that. Most grassroots campaigns aren't able to do that. Independents, if you're an independent running in North Carolina, if I was an independent, not with a political party, I would have needed 83,000 signatures. I mean, no idea how it would have been done unless you're Michael Bloomberg or Howard Schultz or one of those guys. So the money doesn't just corrupt. It's either legalized bribery or a protection racket, whichever way you want to look at it. But it also precludes, because how is this campaign, how is the Libertarian campaign, how is an independent supposed to get their name, their campaign out to 7.5 million registered voters when they're up against the two corporate parties that are going to spend $300 million to do the same? So it precludes as well as corrupts. And, and it's awful, because I got to ask people for money. So whenever I do it, there's that twist in your stomach, that turn in your stomach of like, can you help me? Can you give me money so I can get money out of politics? Like that type of thing. But it is, I thought I understood it, but now 4, 5, 6 months into this thing, I understand it a lot better. Yeah. Not in a good way.
I know, right?
Yeah.
In gerrymandering, implement ranked choice voting. So implement ranked choice voting. This was a big one. So this was actually a ballot initiative that we had here in Massachusetts. Unfortunately, it didn't pass because most people I talked to didn't understand the question.
Yeah.
I felt like that was intentional, to be honest. But this is a big one. And I think that this would really benefit third-party candidates and independent candidates. So implement ranked choice voting. This is something that you would like to see done nationally.
Correct. As well as in the second half of that, to enact proportional representation. And so that's a big ask. You're changing the U.S. first past the post type of 50+1 system that we have to a proportional representation system. But I think when you speak to people about it and you explain it, they understand the inherent fairness in it, the greater capacity for the system. You know, and the thing about ranked choice voting, proportional representation, going to a multi-party democracy, you know, of course, the idea of political choice. My campaign manager likes to say, I go into a supermarket, I've got 50 cereals loaded with sugar that I can choose from, but I only get 2 choices in the ballot box. You know, I mean, like that type of, I think people generally believe that and get that. The thing about multi-party democracy is that it allows you to come back to, if it ever was, I don't know, but it allows you to come back to this halcyon idea of issues-based voting. Of voting for something, of voting your beliefs, your principles, your economic and political philosophies, voting for someone who's going to do something for you, your family, your neighborhood, as opposed to, as we see more than often, voting against someone. You know, people go to the ballot box and they're doing these, you know, this mental gymnastics, like they're an MSNBC or Fox News pundit over who to vote for, who the lesser of the two evils is. You know, and so if you're placing a compromised vote, if your vote already is compromised and you're voting for a compromised candidate, why would you have any faith that what's going to come out of that is going to be anything that benefits you, your family, your community, you know, your class, etc.?
Well said. In the filibuster, that's a big one. Abolish the Electoral College and elect the president by popular vote. Let's talk about this.
I can't believe this is still a thing, right? You know, the only 2 Republicans, George W. Bush, who should be in the dock at The Hague for war crimes, and Donald Trump, who should be in jail for a whole host of crimes. You know, they're elected because of the Electoral College. You know, they're elected because we have this crazy system that goes back a few hundred years that was basically put in place. So because the southern states were throwing a temper tantrum. And, you know, the founder, you know, the founders, the people who put this first system of government together found that as a compromise, a solution to placate the South, so the South wouldn't go their own way. I mean, it's all because of slavery. I mean, so the whole notion that we elect our president just for that reason alone, even if Bush hadn't been elected that way and Trump wasn't elected that way, just for the fact of the taint, the disgrace of that notion that we have this system because of slavery is enough. It should be enough to get rid of it. So the idea of going to a popular vote, I mean, I think, and that takes away, a lot of people are coming around this realization that, you know, a very small percentage of this country has an overwhelming political impact. You know, you hear that if California had the same amount of senators as Wyoming did, they would have, I don't know, 400 senators or something like that. So I think people are realizing that. And there's, I don't think that, and if we had a time machine and went back and we asked these guys who wrote the Constitution and built this government, what would they think about changing things? Pretty certain they'd be on board with it, because as soon as they wrote the Constitution, you know, they passed 10 amendments to it. I mean, Jefferson, you know, used to say that, you know, Jefferson had this thing that of generational change, of that every generation, the laws should all be scrapped and everything should be started over again. That was one of the ideas that Jefferson had. So they certainly did not believe that our Constitution was some type of religiously sacrosanct document that was infallible, the way that we have way too many people in this country talk about it now.
Awesome. Term limits for Congress, I 100% agree. I see people like Dianne Feinstein announcing that she's running again. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Provide for fair ballot access and regulations, full ex-felon voting re-enfranchisement.
Right. It's unjust. It's morally wrong. It's unfair that people who have, first of all, we need major reform in our criminal justice system. Anyway, we spend a lot of time talking about the war on drugs, but just in general, our prison system, our police state that we have. I think anyone who's confronted with the fact that we have 20 to 25% of the world's prisoners and less than 5% of the world's population, I think anyone confronted with that has to acknowledge that we have a police state, an incarceration state that needs to be addressed. It's been this way. I mean, this country was founded on genocide and enslavement. So big shock that the continuation of that is a prison state, an incarceration state. In terms of, though, getting this part about refranchising people who have done their time, who have served their time. And there is a very real racial element to that, because our system, our police system, our law enforcement, our criminal justice system, whatever you want to call it, because it oppresses, because it preys on the Black community, the brown community. It has a disproportionate effect of having Black and brown folks in this country who do not have the ability to vote. It's very purposeful. Again, I come back to using the word deliberate. There's nothing accidental in any of this. And so it just the idea of not just it's the fair and just thing for someone to do, for someone to be able to vote who've fulfilled their obligation as their punishment, whatever you want to call it. It also too it's a means of voter suppression, and it's a very effective one.
Well said. I also believe too that after someone has done their time, they've done their time. I don't feel like they should continue to be punished, and they shouldn't be able to vote for something like after they've already done their time.
Right. And particularly too, I mean, so many, we've seen, say, the war on drugs, just we had something like in this country, 560,000 marijuana arrests last year.
Right.
I mean, like, so people who are still living their lives because of some type of nonviolent drug charge. I see that. I see that. I see that in my neighborhood. Probation officer coming up to neighbor's house. That charge was a long time ago, before his kids were born, and they've got to see their dad talking to this guy with a gun and handcuffs and everything else. And that type of intergenerational trauma on all levels ruins communities. And again, purposeful, deliberate. The war on drugs is a very deliberate extension of Jim Crow, a deliberate extension, which was itself was of the incarceration of the second half of the 19th century. That itself was the result, the continuation of slavery. All this stuff is deliberate, and we have to stop it.
Right. This one is great too. Strict financial controls for members of Congress and their staff, including no Wall Street transactions and disinvestment from any stocks, funds, or industries related to the oversight and appropriation committees on which members of Congress serves, i.e. Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just the amount of corruption that is endemic to the system, the idea that somehow you can own the shares, the property of a corporation that you have control over through the fact that you write laws, regulation, the tax code. I mean, the power of the Congress to either hinder or make plentiful our corporations is inherent to it. I mean, and so this idea that somehow these people can be involved in this, let alone, I mean, we have here the open seat for the U.S. Senate, so the seat I'm running for, Richard Burr, who is leaving the U.S. Senate after being in Congress for about 30 years for the Republican Party. I mean, he most people know him now because at the beginning of the pandemic, he and his brother-in-law were trading stocks off of classified briefings that they were getting about the pandemic. And no, he wasn't held responsible. There was no, he's going to be allowed to retire. Nothing's going to come of it. And there were other members too who took part in that. But just the commonality of this idea that somehow these people are, they're entitled to that success that comes from that power. That's another thing that we have to break.
Statehood for DC. Can you please explain to people why this is important?
Oh, you have hundreds of thousands of people who are disenfranchised. You have, again, I don't think the founders had any idea it would be like this. Part of it is also racial, too, because D.C. up until actually gentrification over the last 10, 15 years was a Black city, a Black town. Yep. I mean, like that's and so a lot of this over the decades has been race-based. Politicians did not want several 100,000 more Black voters. They just did not want that involved in the presidential process, having senators that represent them or a member of Congress. It is just there's a lot of of cynical political reasons for it. There's reasons that have to do with the racial history of this country. There's just political opportunism, why they don't want. It would be if DC demographically would vote for Democrats, and Republicans know that. Same with Puerto Rico. I support whatever the Puerto Ricans want, is what I should say. And if that would be statehood, the idea would be that, well, Puerto Rico would be a democratic state. It may or may not work out that way. As we've seen, I knew people who were very involved in the Turn Texas Blue effort because the Democrats felt that they were entitled to every Latino's vote. And we don't have to work for them. You don't have to earn it. They're just going to vote for us because they're not, so there, I don't know about Puerto Rico, maybe not. But DC, just the idea that somehow you have people living, hundreds of thousands of people who are not entitled to representation in the seat of our government is just, it's people, you tell people this overseas and they say, are you kidding me? Really? That might be the most hypocritical thing I've heard about America, and America is full of hypocrisy.
Yes, no, it's true. Right to determination for more than 3 million people living in U.S. territories: American Samoa, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, and U.S. Virgin Islands. Can you explain this one a little bit?
Yeah, it's very similar to statehood for DC, but it's different in the sense that these are all people, lands that were forcibly taken by American imperialism, American colonialism, American Marines landing and taking these places. And the idea that somehow 100 some odd years later, 80 years later, depending upon the location, these people still live in a system that is just a pure representation of the colonialism that begat it.
Yes.
So, right. So like the whole, again, just on the principle of it, this is wrong. And then the idea of having representation, throw it back, the whole taxation without representation, which lots of folks on the right like to yell about, as long as it goes towards, I guess, just people who look like me and not folks who look like the folks that live in those places, right? Again, it's just a fundamental fairness. It goes back to this idea of democracy, of striving towards democracy, of justice, of people being allowed to have self-determination. Look, I support, say, the right of people in Palestine to have self-determination. It'd be very awful of me to then say, but people in the Mariana Islands or Puerto Rico or the U.S. Virgin Islands don't have that same right. And I don't know how that looks. I'm not going to say that they need to have independence or they need to remain territories or they need to become a state or some other thing, but they should have, the choice should be entirely theirs. And it should be done in a manner that if these territories, for lack of a better word, were to choose independence or some other type of associate or of some other form of independence, I guess, they should be entitled to reparations as well. Because we've seen, particularly say with Puerto Rico, a great example, the way Puerto Rico has just been victimized by American policy, financial, government, regulatory policy that has really hindered Puerto Rico's ability. And you see that with the debt crisis. You see it with the board of governors that controls Puerto Rico now. You see that with the privatization of the electrical system in Puerto Rico that has proven to be just an absolute horrendous disaster for the people of Puerto Rico. And they don't have the ability to be masters of that themselves. They continue to be colonial subjects. So the idea is, this is wrong. And it's far past time to change that.
Thanks so much, Matthew. Many other items here on the list. Eric, can you put the link to Matthew's site in the chat? But I'm just going to go list these really quick. A war on climate change and environmental collapse, not people. No compromise on healthcare for all. In the wars overseas. In the war on drugs. An economy for workers and a livable wage. Economic democracy and ownership of labor. Guaranteed sick and family leave pay. Liberty and life over property, money, and government control. Stop violence-based solutions as government's default policies. Abortion, women's health care, and human rights. So Matthew, your platform is amazing. And I will tell you, I've interviewed a lot of candidates and I've seen a lot of websites. And this one is very detailed. And I think that's something that is missing from some of the other candidates that I've seen. Like, you actually go step by step in detail on your website. So I think that's really great. I have one more question for you. One of the things that I think leftists have been noticing over the past couple of years is that we put progressives through the Democratic Party into DC only to watch them fold, right?
Yeah.
Only to watch them vote along with Democrat establishment, the corporate Democrats, whether it's AOC, whether it's the rest of the squad, have at it. One of the things that I have pointed out is that someone like Bernie Sanders is an independent, but I have never seen Bernie Sanders use his independent status to leverage some type of support from the Democratic Party, because he usually caucuses with the Dems. If you were to win and go into DC as a Green Party member, would you be willing to leverage your vote? For example, if the corporate Democrats say, we want you to vote on this bill, would you be willing to say, well, I'm going to need you to support these items in order to get my support on your bill?
Oh, absolutely. That's the whole point. I will be. We had a saying in the Marine Corps: "No better friend, no worse enemy." And I go back a lot to what FDR said, how because they hated FDR, Wall Street and everything, and he said, "I welcome their hatred," and that's me. I welcome their hatred. I want to go up there and I'll be the worst thing that ever happened to those people. They're not getting their $15 billion aircraft carriers. They're not going to get it. They're not going to get it. If I'm sitting here today reading that a third of our people who've died from COVID died because we couldn't give them healthcare access, because we got to make sure that United and Cigna and all these other corporations are making record profits. If I see that less than 20% of the developed world has gotten vaccinated because we got to make sure Pfizer and Moderna get their profits. No, they're not getting their $15 billion aircraft carriers. They're not getting their fossil fuel subsidies for Exxon. There's going to be no hedge fund or bank bailouts. No, I will bring that place to a halt. It will look nothing at all similar to what's happened before. And I pledge that, because I'm not doing this for any other reason than for the accountability of what I've seen occur, to get some accountability of what we've seen occur, and for justice for the people in my life who are hurting because these people have chosen to do things for profit rather than from people. And that's what I can attest to. That's what I can swear to. And that's what I'll do. I mean, I've got going up there to make friends. I mean, look, I live on my veterans disability pay. I drive Uber. Like, I can have a nice life, and just go on. I've done enough with my life. I don't have to prove anything. But there is an anger in me that I need to act on. And I think a lot of people feel that way. We have to build this. So we have to build this, right? And the idea is put so much pressure on them. One, we build a movement, and out of that comes a political party. We see that with what's happening, say, with the folks at Amazon or Starbucks and labor across. I mean, we're organizing, keep doing this, and let's build a political movement out of that. Put such pressure, cause the Democrats, cause havoc and chaos. Make this idea that somehow I'm a spoiler. I don't like that. If you want to call me a disruptor, I'll take that all day long. I am happy to disrupt this system. That's what I want to do. That's what we have to do, right? And then the change can come out of that disruption. But it's the same way that labor gets what they need through striking, by disrupting the profits of the business. That's the only way we will ever get anything from this political system, is by disrupting the political system. So yes, if I'm in the U.S. Senate, they will hate me. And I will welcome that hatred, because I don't care about them. I care about the people in my neighborhood, the community, my community, people I love, who are suffering because of the decisions of those men and women.
Awesome. Matthew, how can people support you?
Sure. And, definitely need help in a variety of ways, donations especially, but volunteers, people talking about us, telling people about us. Please go to MatthewHoforSenate.org. Ho spelled H-O-H. And 4 is F-O-R. Please go there. You can donate. You can sign up to volunteer. But please, and also to support people here like Sabrina. This is, you know, we're not getting on MSNBC. We're not getting on CNN. You know, we're not. I mean, like the $300 million they spent last cycle, they'll spend 350, 400 million in North Carolina. That goes all into television ad buys. And we know what that type of propaganda is. That's all that is. So yeah, you all have to support voices and journalists and commentators and people who are speaking courageously and truthfully like Sabrina does, because otherwise people like me don't ever have a shot of being heard.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And thanks so much for coming on. And if you're in North Carolina, please, please support Matthew's race. And definitely, I tell you guys this all the time, you got to stop voting in the duopoly. So Matthew, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Sabrina. You have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.